Thanks, Lynn. Very much looking forward to working with all of you today. We're going to really travel across a number of areas where we can start to think about how can we best support students that are entering learning situations. Again, after considerable disruption, we're going to think about what administrators or school leaders can do to help support students. We'll think about what individual teachers and educators in classrooms can do to support students. And I'm going to try to attend to developmental differences in school settings. So we'll talk about elementary school, but also talk a little bit about middle school and high school. I saw as people were checking in that we do have some people that are at the middle school or the high school level. And I'll encourage you as we go along, if I'm talking about a particular topic or area and maybe I'm focused on elementary school, if you have some questions about how to make developmentally appropriate adaptations for older students or different types of school settings, please ask a question about that, and we'll have some time at the end where we can discuss that, because all of the strategies that we're going to talk about today can be adapted and tailored to the different types of school environments that you might work in. And so just because we don't cover that in the slides doesn't mean we can't have some conversation about that towards the end. So please do use the question box to be able to talk about that. We're going to start out by really talking about the system level. How do we help students in their social, emotional, behavioral functioning, especially in the current educational context that we're all in, which is quite different than one we've ever had before. We'll talk about how we can establish a positive school environment for students as they're returning to school and getting more into a typical school setting. I don't think we're there yet. It's not quite what we might remember from a 2019 classroom, but we're getting closer to returning to a bit more normalcy in our school environments. We'll talk about best practice strategies to support students' positive behavior and put them in a situation where they can be ready to learn. I'll present a couple of case studies that can show these plans in action. And then anytime we try a new strategy to support students' positive behavior or social emotional development in schools, we always want to have an eye towards, well, how are we going to monitor and evaluate whether or not this is actually working and doing what we hope it's going to do. So we'll talk a little bit about progress monitoring and assessments that can help us do that. And then at the end, whenever we think about any kind of positive support plan in schools, we might not hit the mark the first time. Almost always we're thinking about an iterative process where we learn, we adapt, and we advance with an even better plan as we're monitoring on an ongoing basis. We'll talk a little bit about how we might troubleshoot some things that are tried out or started to help support students. So without further ado, we're going to start with some system level thoughts. This is a time unlike any other, at least in my lifetime, in school settings. You can think about what happened back in March 2020. We had this abrupt stop of the way we educated students in elementary, middle, high school levels. To their credit, school leaders and educators essentially stopped on a dime, turned around, and changed the whole way that they did business. There was no such thing as remote instruction universally deployed in school settings until March 2020, and schools figured that out. They figured out how to keep students occupied. They thought about maybe Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Students needed to be safe and protected and fed and cared for, and so schools were often remained open to provide meals for students, but in terms of the academic work, that was outsourced to the home setting. In addition, we can think about quite a number of shocks happening to families at the same time. There was an immediate loss of jobs or employment for families where they worked in the service industry, or maybe they had another job. On the other hand, families that had parents that were working on the front lines that were essential workers were maybe working more hours or were under more stress and weren't able to support their student, the student who had to log on and do remote work or listen to lessons remotely while they were at home. Sadly, we know that children couldn't go to their grandparents' house after school for childcare because of fear of infecting an elderly relative that perhaps had some medical vulnerabilities. And even more sadly, we know that many families experienced loss and the grief that comes with it from a loved one passing away due to COVID. Not surprisingly, we can think about this caused a lot of educator burnout and administrator burnout. In fact, we're living in a world right now that is burned out. You can't go to any sector or talk to anybody who's not bearing some of the burden of having to chronically be concerned about this infectious disease and all the consequences of it for now over a year. And maybe what makes that even worse is I think back in March 2020, none of us thought that it would be going on for this long. We were peeking ahead and thinking in a couple of weeks that things would resolve because we had no roadmap for this sort of situation. It never happened before in any of our lifetimes. We also know that the return to school has not been without some bumps. So, at least in Western New York, where I'm from, there's a huge problem in finding drivers for the buses to get children to and from schools. And so sometimes when I'm leaving work later at night and it's 7:30 in the evening, I'm seeing children from the elementary schools being dropped off that late at night because there's so many delays or the routes are so long because there's only a single driver. They can't distribute the children across multiple buses. Um, that's an issue that's going on right now. And when you think about social and emotional and behavioral development, having a child sitting on a bus for 2.5 hours after they've been in school all day is something we probably want to be mindful of, that this is the context that children are trying to learn within right now. It's going to be hard for them to do homework. They might be a little burned out themselves after a week of that sort of lengthy transportation. Uh, you can. I don't need to read you all of these bubbles, but I think that the main point to really be thoughtful about is that we're all doing the best we can in a non-optimal situation. So I think as staff and colleagues within educational settings, we have to have patience with one another. As administrators working with faculty, we have to understand the really heavy burden that they're carrying every day when they go into the classroom. We have to take care of all those kids. As educators, we have to understand that administrators are doing things that they've never had to have part of their job description before, and figure out lots of things. And as parents, I think we have to have a lot of patience for our school settings, and actually a lot of gratitude because they're making things work in spite of all these obstacles that are in front of them. If I were to think about this through the lens of a district leader, there are some considerations that we have to think about. Students are returning to school, and they're now, 2 months into a typical school year. Um, Students did have about a year and a half of a non-typical school year, and the behavioral expectations that we had when students were remote learners, when students were had their classes split in half, and half the class was attending Monday and Tuesday and the other half was attending Thursday, Friday, if there was a hybrid approach in the district. um, the behavioral expectations in those environments are quite different. And so when I talk to educators in our area, they tell me things like, well, our discipline referrals went down to zero in the past year. There weren't discipline problems. That doesn't mean that discipline problems went away. Other things were happening. So students that might have had avoidant behaviors where they were shutting down or kind of, putting their head down or not wanting to participate in class in a typical whole class setting were simply not signing on to Zoom. So they were able to avoid their academic work in a different kind of way. Also, there were fewer children around anywhere. There weren't cafeterias full of children or buses full of children or playgrounds full of children, where some of the social skills and emotional skills that are really important in youth development, they weren't taxed in the same way that they're taxed when there's lots of kids around, right? It's a lot easier to be around a small group of children than it is to be in a large group and figure out how to make your way. Um, we also know that it's more demanding for educators to support children in a whole class setting that's filled with lots of students than maybe it would be in a remote setting. That remote setting, that's a different webinar that has its own challenges and its own differences. But when you have all those bodies in the same room at the same time, it's simply a different management task in terms of making the classroom run well. We also know that staff need more resources. The U.S. Department of Education have laid their cards on the table and said student mental health is one of our priorities right now. It's something that we really need to emphasize. And we don't have a really good handle if we don't do good assessment and progress monitoring of how students are functioning. And in fact, asking them how they're functioning in terms of their mental health is maybe a key role for schools in the next year or two, because they've had this disruption in their lives, and there may be some sleeper effects to that. And we can't expect individual educators to come up with the best approach and practice for supporting all the students on an ongoing basis. There has to be a coordinated effort across the district, because even if a teacher did an exceptional job this year, we can expect that we need to continue to do these exceptional jobs as students get promoted from grade to grade. And so there's going to need to be some consistency across all the educators within the district if we're really going to help students get back on track and excel and thrive and do all the things we want them to do. Also, it's important to acknowledge that school leaders do make significant contributions to long-term outcomes for students. So we know the principal in the school contributes unique and meaningful effects to academic achievement. So even though the educators do all the heavy lifting, right, they're teaching the curriculum, they're working with the student every day, there's evidence that the principal, probably based on how they support their staff, how they support their faculty, the interactions they have with parents, how they use data to make decisions, how they coordinate with the other administrators within the district, those things do have an impact on students' long-term academic outcome. And so it's important to emphasize that school leaders do have a big role in helping students learn. We also know that the principal may also be present for many of the social, emotional, and behavioral opportunities to support students. So if a student has a misstep, they usually get sent down to the principal, right? So this is an opportunity for the principal to really do a good job scaffolding the students' development of their social, emotional, behavioral skills, or it's an opportunity to miss the chance to do that. Principals often interact a lot with parents, right? That's who calls when a parent calls a school because they have a problem or they're upset. They may call the teacher, but they may also interact with the principal about that. And so school leaders have an opportunity to make a positive contribution there too. And they also make decisions about where resources are going to go, whether or not an aid is needed in a particular classroom or location within the school. They also may have decisions about what kind of professional development or training might happen, and that's an important contribution as well. I often ask if a child is having challenges in school, behaviorally or academically. They often get sent to the principal, the leader of the school, and they often end up having to manage disruptive behavior in their office or in their in interactions with the teachers. We know that when principals use a more punitive approach, a discipline approach that ends up resulting in suspensions, and either in school or out of school, that there's very much a chance for inequity to rear an ugly head. And there's now clear data that Black students, students with disabilities, other minoritized students within school settings end up having these punitive practices used with them disproportionately. And so I think that alone to me says that that's evidence that we need to be using a positive behavioral approach. We need to be using restorative practices, and we have to be thinking about, well, what is the goal of our school discipline approach? Is it to be punitive and get a student that maybe needs our help out of the way because they're suspended or they're excluded from a classroom for a particular amount of time? Or is it to figure out our job is to educate every student and do the best job we can possibly do to help them meet their potential, which every student has. Every student has a chance to be a success, and that's our job to do that. We do know that part of the school leader framework does say that within their standards is that they're supposed to promote positive behavioral support. And that's what we're going to talk quite a bit about in the rest of today's session. Many of you, or probably all of you on this call, know about multi-tiered systems of support. You've probably seen this type of pyramid before, but this kind of framework really comes out of public health from the late 80s, early 90s. Places like the Center for Disease Control and Prevention and public health leaders were thinking about we need to organize the way that we support society with our public health initiatives, and we're going to have some things that apply to everybody. They're universal, so all people will get this intervention. We know that there are people always at risk for negative outcomes. They don't have this negative outcome yet, but they could have it later, and so they're going to get some targeted intervention. And then we know that there are people that are already experiencing the negative outcomes, and those individuals are going to need intensive treatment, indicated intervention. We're going to have to support them uh, really well. So, if we think about something like driving accidents in teenagers, a public health person would say, well, a universal intervention would be a seatbelt law. We're going to say that everybody has to wear their seatbelt. And we're going to make that law across the country. And if states don't want to do it, we're going to withhold their funding from the National Transportation Board, and they're not going to get that funding until they do it. And then, so essentially, all states got on board with that. And it's maybe one of the single best public health measures that we've taken in this country to save lives. That'd be a universal intervention. Everybody has to wear their seatbelt. A targeted intervention might be saying, well, there are groups that are at extra risk for negative driving outcomes. One that I don't know if anybody on this call has a teenager. We know that teenagers are the worst drivers on the road. In fact, the first month of licensure is the most dangerous time in anybody's life. And that's usually between 16 to 18 years of age for most drivers. And so a targeted intervention would be something like our graduated driver's licensing laws, right? We say that we're going to not allow teenagers to drive after 9. They can't have more than one passenger in their car. So we're going to do things to protect them because they're at risk, right? And then we have teenagers that have been in accidents, that or drivers that have been speeding, those sorts of things. They go to court. They may have to go to driving school. They might have some restrictions on their licenses. Those would be our intensive or indicated interventions, right? Those are people that are already showing that they're having problems with driving. And so we have to do something about that. So schools, I think, wisely said, we can use this same model in the way we support students. So we can do things that help all students. So we have if we're thinking about academic instruction here, we have a great curriculum, right? All students are going to get a really good curriculum that's evidence-based and we know helps students learn. We might have some targeted interventions for students at risk. So if we're doing good progress monitoring, maybe there are some students that aren't quite progressing fast enough in terms of their fluency or their other literacy skills, and so they're going to get some small group instruction. And then we might have students that are really showing serious problems with learning. They're not keeping pace with what we would expect, and even after they've had some targeted intervention, and they may get more intensive services or supports or interventions. And so this multi-tiered system of support can also be applied when we think about social, emotional, and other behaviors that are not necessarily related to academic learning, but very important when we think about child development. So really there's two domains to think about, right? We want to teach adaptive skills and we want to reduce functional impairments. And both of those things are going to be our goal if we have a really good positive behavioral support program in place. When I think about the way to roll out a positive behavioral support program, I think about a different kind of pyramid. I want to have the positive interventions weighted towards the bottom, and I want to have the more negative or responses to negative situations. Those should be used very sparingly. And I think maybe unlike any other time, this is the most important time to emphasize the bottom of that pyramid. We have a group of students right now that are running a deficit in terms of their experience with empathy, attention, listening, encouragement, good teaching. In spite of what a great job schools did with moving things to remote or hybrid instruction, there's no replacement for a caring, loving, engaged, attentive educator working with you every day in the classroom. I know that everybody on this call would agree with me about that. And so I think this is the time more than ever to really emphasize these things. Children are running a deficit of rewards and celebrations. Elementary school students haven't been to birthday parties for their classmates in a year and a half. There haven't been the sorts of markers of rewards or celebration like school musicals or other events like graduations that really mark even a kindergarten graduation or graduation or moving up day to middle school. Those things were postponed or didn't happen. And so I think we need to make up that deficit by enhancing even more of these sorts of situations where we can praise and encourage students. We'll talk a little bit about how limits and rules and follow through with those things can help students really find the right path and stay on it. And then uh, these other things should only happen very rarely. In fact, if the bottom of the pyramid is working really well, if you're never moving up to the logical consequences, because I'm an optimist about kids. If they're in a fun, engaging, interesting, really rewarding classroom situation, they don't misbehave because they're so busy having a good time with all these other things that are happening. There's no replacement for a really great lesson or a really great activity in terms of helping students thrive in terms of their behavior and social emotional development. When we think about what school leaders can do, I think they really have to think about how do we course correct now, or how do we get the train back on the track. So in many of the districts I've worked with, I don't know if it's the same with some of the districts all of you are coming from. It was hard to maintain evaluations for special education supports because students weren't in a classroom. So how could you really judge if the student was having class impairment in their learning when they were in this environment that was unlike any other? Problem solving team meetings for students that were maybe at tier two, or were receiving targeted interventions. Sometimes those things weren't happening as consistently or as effectively as in the past, given the change in the school environment. So I think we have to redouble our efforts to get those things on track, while at the same time acknowledging that we may have more students that are showing that they have needs right now, that with good, effective education and behavioral support, the that will get reduced, and we'll be left with the students that really need the intensive supports after that. We know that tier one strategies, the universal strategies to help students just get reoriented to how to behave in a classroom, what happens in the cafeteria, and what our expectations are there, how to um, how to interact in a recess type environment. Tier one practices, like, for example, reviewing rules, having good monitoring in place, having routines and clear expectations, all of those things, if the school is making sure that those are happening not only in the classrooms, but in the other times of the day when maybe other adults are supporting the student's behavior, that's going to be an important thing to do. And then universal screening is probably more important now than ever. We really need to know where students are at, not only in their academic functioning, but in their social, emotional, and behavioral functioning, because literally in some cases, the last 2 months are the first time educators have been able to get a good handle on where the students are in terms of their functional capacities. Uh, when once all that's done, if we can be confident that tier one is in a good place, then I think school leaders are in a, a fairly they're on the high ground for determining whether or not tier two or three supports are needed. But it's not going to be until they can be confident that tier one is really working really well, that the classroom structure is tight, that the children understand the expectations, that the educators are comfortable with all the other demands that they have, and still able to maintain good instruction and good behavioral support. Then we can think about what else can we do to help students. And I guess maybe one last thing to think about if we try to be optimistic is that we've had a break in the way school has been done for a long time. This is an opportunity to redouble our efforts on the things we know work really well, but also to adapt in advance based on potential new opportunities to engage students or their families in learning. Maybe think about an opportunity to revise or advance a stronger positive behavioral support framework, since there has been this break over the past year and a half. A couple last points about this, and then I'm going to shift gears and I'm going to talk about particular strategies that can be used to support students. School disruptions due to the pandemic do provide an opportunity to explore changes in the way business had been done in the past. It's an opportunity to redirect resources and personnel to help with supporting MTSS frameworks. Uh, while there's been quite a bit of turnover within schools, and I think if I talk to any school leader, hiring and training is one of the top of mind issues that they bring up this school year in particular. It is an opportunity to provide really strong initial training that could maybe enhance the positive behavioral supports that happen in schools. We also know that parents, by force, had to become more active and engaged with their child's learning if they were monitoring any remote instruction that was happening during the day. Um, there's an opportunity here to continue to engage with parents as partners in their child's learning. And the use of technology might be something people smarter than I are going to be able to figure this out. But there's maybe a way to continue to keep parents involved in a positive way that may overall enhance their support of their child across their learning journey through school. And I guess it's also important for district and school leaders to be very thoughtful about the stress and the wellness of the educators that are literally our frontline workers that are doing the job every single day. We need to make sure that we acknowledge all that hard work, express our gratitude for that hard work, and also be keen to whether or not it's ever too much, and what do we need to do to help that person um, recharge their batteries, or give them the resources they need in order to do their job well. So I'm going to shift gears now a little bit here and talk about how to enhance positive climate in the classroom. School leaders, once they put that MTSS framework in place, some of these are things that could be thought of as embedded within Tier 1 and sometimes even moving up to Tier 2 in that MTSS framework. So, one of the best tools we have in our toolbox as educators is the way we plan ahead and establish how a classroom is going to work. Structuring a classroom is really important. We can think about some of the home learning environments that I happened to see when I was partnering with schools showed variations in structure, right? Some students were sitting at a table, some were laying in bed, some had a TV on in the background. One of the things we can really do to help students is get them back into a structured learning environment that's uniform each day, and all their materials are available and in front of them so that they can get to work and get to learning without a lot of extra distractions in place. We want rules positively phrased, right? Telling children what they should be doing as opposed to what they should not be doing. There's an infinite number of things that kids should not be doing in school, but there's only a small number of things that they're supposed to be doing, right? Staying on task, being respectful to others within the classroom, those sorts of positive phrased rules are very nice tools because they become part of the class language about what's expected. And then predictable routines is really important right now. We're coming out of a time of gross unpredictability. One of the great things about being a child is that you don't have to think about what's supposed to happen next or what's going to happen. The adults do that for you, and uh, frankly, the past year and a half, that hasn't been the case for all kids. And so, going back to a school setting where there's a regular time when classes start and a regular time when classes end, lunches at the same time every day, I leave at the same time every day, that kind of routine and predictability is something that makes children feel secure and comfortable. And we can think about how to embed that into each lesson as well, right? Maybe there's a pace to the math lesson or a pace to the social studies lesson that will help kids get back into a regular pattern of doing things. Talked about this deficit of positivity. The One of the most powerful tools an adult has when they work with children is their attention. I probably don't need to tell any of you this. All you need to do is get a call on the classroom phone or have somebody knock on your door and come to talk to you in class. And I imagine you have 100 emergencies of things that need to be addressed right away from your students. They don't like your attention being given to somebody else and not to them. And anytime there's a chance somebody else is getting that attention, they're going to try to elicit your attention back. So if we know that, if we know our attention as adults is really important, we want to give it to kids freely every time that they're doing something that is showing their own growth. We want to comment on that. Anytime they are following the class rules, or making an extra effort, or showing that they're a good citizen in the class, maybe helping out a classmate write down their homework because they were out of the classroom, and they're lending their agenda for that student to write those things down. We want to comment on those things because those are really positive things that we want to see more of. It is the case that kids always get called out when they do things that they're not supposed to do. And so we want to, in fact, best practice suggests we should have 3 of these positive statements for every one of these corrections, commands, demands, reprimands that we have to use. And if you really think about that, if you were to, now we know this from studies with parents and educators, that as kids get older, after kindergarten and first grade, the rate of attention for positive behaviors goes way down. It rapidly decreases, and it stays down until you're in 12th grade. And now you guys are adults. You know what it's like to be an adult. The next time my boss calls me on my phone and tells me what a great job I've been doing, that'll be the first time. Nobody says anything nice to you anymore once you're a grown up, right? It's just all you get corrected and complaints and that sort of thing. So we can do better, right? We can ensure that we increase these rates of positive attention, comments, compliments, encouragement, acknowledgments. All those things should be at a very high rate. And they need to be an even higher rate than maybe we've all been used to, because kids haven't gotten that for a year and a half. When we think about helping kids succeed in classrooms, one of the most common ways that they can either succeed or fail is in response to a behavioral request. And as adults, one of the other most powerful tier one strategies that we can use is making sure that we set the kids up for success with the requests that we issue. Actually, there's a this research, this line of research comes from back in the 1970s. There's a researcher, Rex Forehand, who used to have parents and 4-year-olds come into his laboratory and had a one-way mirror, and he would watch them play. And after about 5 or 10 minutes, he'd say, "Okay, now get your child to clean up." And they would have a bunch of research assistants behind the mirror hearing what the parents said, and then they would look and see, did the child do what the parents said, yes or no? And they created, based on all the research, a list of bad requests versus good requests. So bad requests are the ones where it's not clear whether the child's attending. So you have a classroom full of kids maybe doing work or studying or reading, and shout out an instruction, and you're not sure that they all have attended to that instruction. The odds of some of them not following through on that are pretty high, right? Get out your math book, turn to page 53, do the odd number items, take out a lined piece of paper, write a heading at the top, and make sure you skip a line between each item you answer. That's too many steps, even for high schoolers, right? Some of you on the call probably lost me after the first one or two things I said you're supposed to do. Bad requests are like the ones we all grew up with, right? They're vague, pay attention, be good. Uh, and requests that are repeated without consequences aren't effective either. If we keep telling the child to do the same thing over and over again, but we just keep repeating it and nothing happens, then they know, well, I can go on for about 5 or 10 of these before you really mean business. And so I'll just ignore the early ones. Good requests always get the student's attention. They're one step at a time typically. They're behaviorally specific, so they tell the child what to do as opposed to what not to do, rather than stop that or quit or don't. They say exactly what to do. So and if I had a child who was maybe not in their area or their space that they were supposed to be in, rather than saying, "Don't go over there, quit getting up, stop moving around," I would give a positive command like, "Sit quietly at your chair." I tell them exactly what to do. And because I'm an optimist about kids, I've usually been proven true. When you tell them what to do, they usually do it. No child is signing up to really give me a hard time. Usually it's my faults in the way I'm presenting the information to them, uh, trying to address whatever's going on that results in this negative chain of behavior. If I do a good job up front, almost always the children do a good job too. We can also choose to ignore minor inappropriate behaviors. So this comes up. I work with students with ADHD frequently in classrooms, and this comes up a lot. They can be fidgety, restless. Sometimes they'll stand up, or they're sitting on their knees on their chair. And I'll often have a conversation with the teacher about, well, what is it that you really want to happen? Let's say, well, I need that work to get done. This is a student I'm concerned about their academic progress. I want them to finish their work, and uh, and then we'll have a longer conversation, and I'll say, well, if they're doing their work and they're standing up, or they're doing their work and they're sitting on one of their legs, or they're doing their work and they're on the side of their desk, would that be okay as long as the work gets done? And many teachers, when they think about it that way, say, yes, I'm not going to miss the forest for the trees. As long as the work gets done, I can ignore all those other things. And as it turns out, if you do ignore those things and maybe compliment the positive behavior, boy, I got a hard worker in here today, instead of sit down the right way, turn around, you end up distracting the child from doing the work by trying to get them to sit still. But most educators aren't in the business of trying to teach kids to sit still in their desk facing front. They're trying to teach children to read or to be able to do math or to learn about something in their social studies class. And so that's one way you can think about planned ignoring in your role as an educator. And that's a good tier one strategy. Premack contingencies are another one. When you finish your work, then you can do some free reading. When you pick up these materials, then you can move to your next activity. You put the less preferable activity before the more preferable activity. When everybody's cleaned up in the back, then we're going to line up for lunch. I have a couple of class-wide strategies I'm going to encourage you to think about. And if anybody has any questions about these for their own classroom, I'd also encourage you to shoot me an email afterwards. Be happy to talk about these some more. Whole class strategies can be used. The good behavior game is something many of you may have heard about. If you go to YouTube, there are some nice videos. If you just type in the good behavior game, you can see them in action in real classrooms. What this does is really uses the power of peer attention to do all the work for you as the educator. So in a good behavior game, teachers target specific behaviors, like maybe they don't like interruptions during their lesson, or maybe there's some class clowning going on that's disrupting the classroom during academic time. You create a specific behavior that you're targeting. You divide the class up into teams. So maybe each row is a team, or you might have quadrants of your classroom are teams. Each time that behavior is shown, the team receives a check mark on the board or gets some feedback that's one example of the behavior we're trying to work on in this class. And as long as the team doesn't exceed whatever the goal is the teacher set, maybe it's a 3 strikes you're out or something like that, then the team gets to participate in a short positive reward. Could be just a minute of getting up and acting like an animal at your desk, or it could be a freeze dance game or something like that. If your team went over the 3, then they have to just sit at their desk and wait till the next time the game restarts. There's a lot of evidence that shows that this is an incredibly powerful tool. One of the reasons it works is because it takes the peer attention that might have been driving the class clowning or the tattling or whatever it is that was going on, and now it turns it into attention to try to behave, because I'm invested in us earning that reward. And if you're clowning around and we're getting a check mark on our team, I don't like that anymore. I don't think that's funny, because now it impacts me. And what the evidence shows is that classrooms that have the good behavior game, this was with primary grade kids, if you have a good behavior game in your classroom, those students at the end of the year are less shy and less aggressive. And then even if you follow up those classrooms into middle school, the children that got the good behavior game approach in primary school are less aggressive later. So it suggests that this is a very important developmental time for kids, that if you teach them how to cooperate and collaborate on working together towards doing the right thing, that has long-lasting effects. And in our field, I have a hard time thinking of other examples where we've shown 5 years later positive effects of something as simple as just putting kids on a team and encouraging them to work together. Some of you might have class-wide point systems. I see lots of great creative examples of these as I go around in classrooms. I'll tell you about one that my old graduate school advisor put together, which was pretty clever. It was a class-wide lottery system. Again, this is for elementary school age kids. You establish some target behaviors and explain them to the class. You also have a list of class jobs, right? Paper passer, school main office messenger, maybe, well, it used to be eraser cleaner, but I don't think anybody has erasers in their classroom anymore. Now they might be your tech advisor that helps you get the smartboard set up or erases the smartboard, that sort of thing. You can come up with a whole list of class jobs. And each child on their desk has 3 tickets that they put their name on, and it just goes right on the edge of their desk. You scan the class at unannounced times, 2 to 3 times per period, and everybody that's doing what they're supposed to be doing, following the rules, engaged with their academic work, they keep their ticket. If they aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, they might lose their ticket. You can also award tickets instead of taking away. Teachers can go based on what they feel is the best approach for their own classroom. At the end of the day, though, whatever tickets were kept go into a bin, and then they get picked out, and each ticket that gets picked out gets assigned to one of those class jobs. So instead of just a random assignment to class jobs, now you have to be in the running for a class job by showing you've been responsible throughout the day to earn your way onto this job. And you've now created the best job in the whole joint, the ticket picker, right? Nothing's better than getting up in the front of the class at the end of the day and picking out the ticket and being the first one to see who gets to be the messenger for the main office the next day. And then each day it resets. So use the class jobs as a sustainable reward for students that are doing the right thing across time. Now, here are a couple of extensions for older grade levels. I know we have some middle school and high school educators on the call as well. Group contingencies work just as well at these upper grade levels, maybe even better because peer attention is so important for these students. Here's an example in a high school classroom. High school teachers were targeting disruptive and on-task behavior that was going on during their instruction. They set a 2-minute countdown timer at the beginning of the class. And if the timer went off, so it went 2 minutes down to 0 without any disruption, the class earned a point. So I think the teacher assigned one of the students to be in charge of the timer and another student to be in charge of the tick marks for the points. This was about a 40-minute class. So the class had to earn 17 points to earn free time at the end of the class, right? 34 minutes of non-interrupted instruction. Look at these results. These are some of the nicest results we would see in a classroom. So during the baseline time before they were using this intervention, you could see that this was across 3 different classrooms. The blue, green, and yellow are 3 different classrooms. There was quite a bit of disruption because students weren't earning a lot of points. Once they instituted this intervention, the class became perfect. They earned 17 points in across all 3 classrooms as soon as they started the program. When they took it away, the students became disruptive again. There wasn't anything in it for them. I think they were able to earn some free time at the end of the class if they had enough points. And then when they reinstated, it worked again. So this is a very simple positive behavioral support that can really help students focus towards the behavior that the teacher hopes to see. And then these are students in the intervention classrooms that are learning more because they're not interrupted or disrupted. So as I'm wrapping up here, I want to make sure to leave some time for questions. I do want to talk just a little bit about how we're evaluating our outcomes. We, in some sense, have had a resetting in schools and classrooms, and so we do need to know whether or not the strategies and procedures we're reinstituting, as well as the new ones that we're adding, are actually working. And so I think district leaders really need to set goals for what they hope to see in terms of their practices. This could include whether people are receiving training as expected or as indicated. They might keep track of turnover. Turnover is sometimes a marker for a stress system. They should definitely be assessing exclusionary discipline practices. Any exclusionary discipline practices should probably get a very careful review because we want to keep kids in the school and we want to help them to learn. This is the school is maybe the best place for a student that's having some challenges with their behaviors in terms of them being supported and given the opportunity to grow and advance. And we need to have feedback loops and mechanisms for feedback. This is from parents, from educators, and from students, and probably from other people in the school, the other support staff in the school as well, so that that kind of spontaneous feedback can serve as a canary in the coal mine. It can let us know if there's a area where maybe we need to pay extra attention as the school leader. Educators should set goals of their own for their desired outcomes. These might be academic targets. These could be social or emotional or behavioral targets. And you can evaluate how your students are doing. So an example would be some colleagues of mine have developed the SABR's assessment tool. It helps you learn about the total behavior of the students, but in 3 really important domains that we care about for children in school: their academic behavior, their social behavior, and their emotional behavior. And you can repeat this assessment over time. So you can learn about whether or not any interventions you're trying within a multi-tiered systems of support are moving the needle on a whole class or whole grade level, but also on an individual level for a particular student that may be directed intervention. Another tool that we use a lot in our work is the direct behavior rating. It's rated by the National Center for Intensive Intervention. It's a useful tool because it is very much like a systematic direct observation, but not as costly. So in a DBR, a teacher will take, say, their ELA period, and for a particular student, they'll rate how the percentage of time that student was disruptive, academically engaged, and respectful. And this turns out to be not hard for the teachers to do. It's just 3 check marks on a continuum for each of those things. And it's a very nice progress monitoring device that you can use over time to keep track of how the student's doing. In fact, Illuminate has a number of different measures. One of the important things to think about measurement is that your measurement should always be aligned with your purpose of your assessment. So sometimes it's for screening or identifying issues. Progress monitoring is a different purpose. And so you need to make sure that you're using an array of tools to cover all of those things. And then the last thing I'm going to say as I'm wrapping up here is to just think a little bit about troubleshooting. It's almost always the case when we work in systems and when we work with students and we work with their families and we work with educators that we don't always hit the target right in the bullseye the first time. That usually we have to think about iterative processes and changes as we go along. And these are just some questions you can use to guide your thinking on what should we adapt or change to make our system work better. Are all the stakeholders here having a seat at the table, right? Do we have a blind spot in terms of talking to somebody that should really be involved in here? Is the fidelity of what we're saying we're doing true? Are we really implementing the interventions as intended? And teachers can use the same kind of approach to troubleshoot class-wide programs. Do kids understand what we're asking of them with these goals? Are we monitoring their behavior effectively? Are there rewards occurring frequently enough, or are these things that kids even care about that they would be motivated to work towards? And I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. I presume there may have been some questions as we went along in the chat. Happy to try to have a conversation here about some of these things, and hope that it was a pretty broad view or overview of a number of things. Hope some of those things are good items for people to think about as they move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Fabiano. Yes, we have had a number of questions already come through. The first one, can you speak to the difference between the SEB needs that might be identified by something like SABRS versus the SEB needs that might be related to the general learning environment, and how we'd support those things differently?
So, yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know if you had something in mind in particular as you were asking that question. I would say that the SABRS is a nice tool because it ends up looking at particular domains that are important for students and leaves room for growth. So when you think about academic enablers, whether the student has some organizational skills or some of the things that we know are prerequisites to putting yourself in a position to learn, that's important to know about if a student has strengths or maybe some areas in need of growth. Those also can inform intervention, right? If organization is a concern, there are organizational interventions that we know can help students get better. When we think about social and emotional and behavioral concerns in the general learning environment, I think that was the second part of the question. How is it different from that? The SABRS is a tool that can be helpful, but oftentimes we may be wanting to know more about the particular individual student we're concerned about. And there may be contextual factors that a rating scale in and of itself won't tell you about if you don't have some knowledge of the broader situation. Like maybe there's some environmental factors that are impacting the student, like something going on in their home or something happening in the classroom socially with other students. Maybe there's been another abrupt change in the school environment. Maybe their teacher has left that they had a good rapport with, and there's a substitute teacher in there for a couple of months. So I think it's important to do the standardized assessment because that gives us a good frame of reference. But it's also important to learn about the broader environment and context the student is coming from to understand what resources and strengths they have, as all students have those things, but are there also areas where we might need to do some extra supporting?
Super helpful. Thank you. Next question. Do you have any tips for how we can get our team back on track without causing more stress or causing more burnout among our staff?
Huge issue and concern right now, right? I don't have a magic elixir to help with that, but one thing I could say is something we've been trying to be really mindful of on our team is returning to the reason we got into the business in the first place. It was to have fun, to help support kids, to watch them grow, to be proud of them, to really, we're almost overwhelmed now with all kinds of things that have nothing to do with that, right? We have all kinds of different rules that we have to follow. We have more stressors. I talked about the transportation issue. Kids might be showing up late to class, hungry or grouchy because they've been on a bus for 2 hours. I think one thing we can't control any of those things, right? They're out of our control. But what we can control is the focus that we have on giving every kid the best chance we possibly can, and having fun with them. Getting back to the reason why we thought that education was a field we wanted to be in the first place. This means more smiles, more joking, more chances to learn about the student's own perspectives, integrate that into the lessons or the work we're doing. And I think the more we're able to do that, the more some of those other things will recede and not be as oppressive as we do our job.
Super helpful. Next question. We have been conducting universal screening in our schools, and it's resulted in a lot of specialized needs, like calls to child support services. Do you have any suggestions for how we can continue with screening, but also continue to keep those specialized resources up?
It is an important question. I think what the data are showing that while schools were on remote or hybrid instruction, calls to child abuse hotlines or support for students that were being neglected, they went down because the school often is one of the last or one of the most important options for protecting student safety. And when teachers did not see the child every day in person, it was harder to get a handle on what was going on. In some of my work with the high schools, that's their big concern right now, are internalizing problems that are invisible unless you ask a student, are you having problems with anxiety or depression or even suicidality? And I think it makes our job harder, but it also is a critical role that as educators we fill, that we might be providing support that wouldn't be there otherwise, and we might expect that it's going to be a greater need right now. But if we do a good job in our universal screening and providing resources and supports and interventions for students that need it right now, we may be investing in those students in a way that results in less difficulties or bigger problems down the road. So that question, I think, is right on point. We should be doing universal screenings now, and we should be knowing right where our students are at, even if the message isn't always a positive one. Essentially, we need to be present and respond to these cries for help.
Thank you. Next question. We are, in terms of finding motivators for hard to motivate kiddos, do you have any suggestions for folks?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to tackle in my own professional work, because everybody's motivated by something, right? Sometimes these hard to motivate kiddos are motivated by not having to do their work, or avoiding a task that's difficult for them, or getting a rise out of an adult. And so then we have to think about, well, what else do they like, or what else are they going to be motivated by? Now, there are a couple of strategies you can use about that, right? There's one person that's the expert on what motivates them, and that's the child or student themselves, right? So having a conversation with them to say, hey, look, I really want us to be successful here. I want us to get this work done. I enjoy your contributions to it when you make them to the lesson. I want more of that. What can we do? What would be a positive outcome for you? What would be nice for you if we were able to meet some of these goals we set ahead of time? And kids are really honest about this. This is a conversation they like to have, right? They would tell you exactly what they like to earn. You could ask their classmates what they might like to earn, get a sense for that. And we usually suggest having a menu of motivators, because McDonald's knows this, right? They don't just sell cheeseburgers anymore. They sell 100 things, because they want to guarantee that every time someone drives by, there's something there that they might like at that given moment. It's the same thing with kids. So extra free time might be fun some days, but if my friend is sick, then it's not a motivator, so I might as well get my money's worth and not do my work, right? But if I have a menu of things that you can choose from, then if that's not a big time motivator for today, maybe a homework pass was something that I would be willing to work for today, and that'd be helpful. So good menu of rewards and asking the kid are usually the things I would think about doing first. And there's a solution out there for every kid. Don't ever give up. It just takes longer to find that solution for some of our students.
Awesome. I think on that note, we can actually start wrapping up as we're getting close to the end of our time. Before we do, I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of slides at the end of the presentation. The first of which is that at the end, we do have a slide with tons of free resources, not only for supporting social, emotional, and behavior needs with kiddos, as well as doing so within an MTSS framework. So we invite you to come pick through anything that would be helpful and share it with your team. There's also a number of additional resources available on the Illuminate website. If you would like to learn more about Illuminate education and how it can help you support SEB needs with your students, we invite you to reach out so we can discuss your unique interests and needs and goals. Illuminate provides SEB screening and progress monitoring assessments, as well as a suite of MTSS collaboration and management tools, including incident tracking and visualizations to understand trends, intervention management, as well as student plans, in addition to a number of other things. So if you have any interest, we invite you to reach out. As a note, all of Illuminate's services and products are applicable funds for the stimulus funds under ESSER. So there's more information about that on this slide as well. Thank you, everyone, for taking some time to join us today. Thank you, Dr. Fabiano, for an amazing presentation. And thank you to our friends at EWEB for having us again.
Thank you. We're grateful for all the educators out there doing all the great work they're doing. Thank you.